Hello, and welcome back to Magnetic Masculinity Podcast, where we provide men with practical tools and strategies to bridge the gap between achievement and fulfillment so that they can live their most magnetic lives. Today, we continue talking on relationships, and today's topic is something that I feel is inevitable in relationships, which is conflicts. But more specifically, we're talking about conscious conflict. So maybe we can start with what is conscious conflict and why is it important when it comes to relationships?
Yes. Well, the buzzword, as we call conscious living, conscious conflict, conscious eating, it basically means we are making a free will choice that is authentically aligned for us in that vehicle of consciousness. So if we're not making a conscious choice or in a conscious conflict or a conscious way of living, what it's alluding to is, as we discussed in previous episodes, it's often said that 90 to 95% of the thoughts we think, the words we speak, the choices we make, the habits we create, and the patterns we experience are based on subconscious programming. And if we bring our parts work episode into that, it means we're often in this subconscious sort of hostile takeover from our different parts, rather than being that loving, wise adult or that leader or that CEO or that sort of more magnetic, conscious version of ourselves. Pardon me. So conscious conflict is when we're able, which we're not always, even I'm not always able to be honest. I am most of the time, but on our deepest, closest relationships, we sometimes go what might be referred to as unconscious, where we get triggered, activated, and bang, we're not speaking heart to heart. We're speaking heart to part. Our inner child is talking to somebody else's protector personality and they are just going at it. And we are just in reactivity rather than curiosity, compassion, and connection.
How can men know or identify that they are in part to part versus heart to heart?
You'll know. You might not know in the moment, because in the moment you don't know when you're quote unquote unconscious. I know there's a lot of different meanings for that word, but when you're unconscious, you're in reactivity. So you're not pausing to think, you're not reflecting. You are just in a sort of primal panic, an automatic program, defensive, projecting, shutting down. And you're not sort of calm and curious and connected. And later you might be able to look back and reflect and go, oh, I was not there. I was just in that hostile takeover or in that subconscious old pattern or strategy. But if you can remain curious and compassionate and self-reflective without becoming defensive, then chances are you're in conscious conflict. And even if a conflict begins with this sort of like triggered, reactive, defensive, feeling unheard, feeling of passive aggressive, whatever it is, once your nervous system settles and once that hostile takeover has passed, then you can go back, and that's probably a better time to engage in conscious conflict, because it's virtually impossible to do, even for me, most of the time when you're in that state of reactivity and that some old wound has been sort of triggered.
Can you talk a bit more, maybe even like the importance of the conflict? Because I feel like there's this assumption that if you have conflict or disagreement about something, then it means that it's a bad relationship or there's no compatibility or something along those lines. Like, can you talk a bit more on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I definitely have gone through different phases in my own evolution. And I used to have a belief that if you had conflict, it meant that you were going to break up, or that conflict led to separation. So I would sometimes be a people pleaser and avoid conflict. And then I swung the pendulum the other way in a different sort of way. And I would approach conflict and try to jump into it. Or become reactive. And I read a book called Fight Right by John and Julie Gottman. And they said something that I thought was very profound, which was something about basically we tend to look at conflict as a threat rather than an opportunity for growth and expansion. And their research, which is really good, high quality research over decades and decades, showed that couples who experience conflict is actually a KPI of sustainability in the marriage. So people who did not engage in any conflict were more likely to get a divorce. But it's then, are we having the same conflicts over and over in an unconscious way, that part to part, playing out those subconscious wounds and narratives and programming and software from childhood? Or are we getting to the root of it and ending that cycle together? And that's where we can do some of the most divine work in our sacred relationships to heal those old wounds, change patterns, and that conflict can be a catalyst for even more deep and meaningful connection. And that's a helpful and important reframe, I think, for those of us that have had suboptimal experiences with conflict or have become either very conflict focused or very conflict averse.
And before you go a bit more into conscious conflict itself, what are some of the things that you might have identified that might be getting in a way for men to see it as opportunity for growth instead of something negative or something to be avoided?
I think just social conditioning, and I think it's very individual. I can't say for men in general because it's going to depend on their personality. It's going to depend how conflict was handled in their home. So for instance, if you're in a home where when you get angry or upset and you try to express a boundary of something valid or a need or a want that you are advocating for yourself, and you are put in a timeout or sent to your room or told, I will not speak to you until you are, calm again, you could develop an internal aversion to conflict, which will either make you a self-sacrificing people pleaser, or you'll become blind to your own anger and conflict and be like, oh, I'm not like that. And you'll just leak it out on other people subconsciously. So it really depends how conflict was treated in your home. If conflict was like, if mom and dad fought all the time, or and if they came back to love, or if you saw them divorce after that. So there's a lot of factors that play into that. But I think it's fair to say that regardless of what your historical programming was in that vehicle of consciousness, I think it's exciting to look at conflict as an opportunity or catalyst for deeper connection and more integration and healing within ourselves and our partner. And a lot of those wounds that we carry, like we've talked about in previous episodes, those kind of festering wounds in your personal relationship, is when those wounds are really going to get poked. And instead of going, ow, you hurt me, we go, ow, oh, good. Now I know exactly and specifically where I need to do a little bit of work. I know where my edge is and what weakness is this here to guide me to strengthen.
Yeah,
Instead of blaming the other person if it is something that's one of our own triggers. And over time, you can create, in this conscious relationship, you can create protocols or procedures so that if one of you or both of you is unconscious at the time or in that primal panic or that hostile takeover, that eventually you can come back and use that as a beautiful opportunity to heal and become closer.
How can men navigate, let's say they see their partner being like unconscious in that moment? How can they, or what are some of the tools that they might use to make that person aware or conscious, similar to what their partner could be using for them as well, if they are in that moment?
That's a great question. And that would be modeling a different behavior to your partner, regardless how you've handled conflict in the past. When either of us is in that state of hostile takeover or unconscious, think of it like a primal panic. Think of it like they are shut down. They're not aware. They feel unsafe. So the first thing we want to do, we don't want to point out, you've gone unconscious. You're unconscious right now. That's not going to be helpful. I've definitely done that probably in my 20s, but I was very unskillful at conflict. And I'm still to this day working on it. I'm newly married, so we get to do some of this delicious deep work together in my own marriage. But I think that when our partner, if we're conscious and our partner is in a trigger or an overwhelmed state, before we do anything, remember, connect before we correct, even if your partner is in the wrong. Now, caveat, I'm not saying that you accept abusive behavior, because women can be very abusive to men as well. So I'm not saying that if your partner is behaving abusively, you should take it. But what I'm saying is if your partner is flipping out, acting unconscious, shutting down, whatever they are, recognize it as a cry for help and a fact that they're feeling unsafe and that they're in a hostile takeover, and think what you would want when you're acting like a belligerent, obnoxious jerk. You want somebody to comfort you and say, wait, whoa, I'm here with you. You're safe. I'm not going anywhere. I got you. And you can, if they can't talk about it in that moment, or if they're projecting and blaming and that, you know, they're not conscious yet, they might want a hug. They might want you to just sit and presence them. It's not when somebody's in that quote unquote unconscious state or in that takeover or that primal panic state, is not the time to fix or correct things. And that's one of the things I need to work on. Is I immediately, especially because I'm a human behavior expert, I notice immediately when something, oh, I know what's happened here. This has happened. This has happened. And I sometimes start trying to correct or fix things before my partner has completely experienced that emotional release. So I am very similar to men in that way. I like to fix things. I'm like, oh, I know how to fix this. But when we're in that child panic, think of it like they've had a hostile takeover from their inner child, is not the right time to explain what went wrong, give them your perspective. We want to, again, connect before we correct, and just recognize that our partner is suffering, our partner is unsafe, and our partner is experiencing one of those childhood glitches or faulty software. And even if they are acting a little bit obnoxious or belligerent, it's because they just don't know how to cope, which again is not an excuse for abusive behavior. But if we recognize it for what it is, we're less likely to take it personally. We're less likely to make it mean that we are a failure. We're less likely to make it mean that they don't like us. We're less likely to make it mean all kinds of things, because our little brains, these little supercomputers, are meaning makers. And that's one of the tools that when I'm working with couples who want to practice more conscious relationships, is also that accountability layer of what am I making it mean? So if I get activated and I'm trying to start watching my words, because I'm very committed to the process of asking ourselves in any moment, am I using my words as medicine or poison? And if somebody else is spewing poison at us, it's not okay, but it never helps to spew poison back at them. So I ask myself, am I using my words as medicine or poison, both to myself and other? So some people might lash out when they're feeling shame or trauma or shut down. That's one of my strategies, is I would lash in and be like, you're such an idiot. Why can't you should do better? And I became very self-abusive. I'd be like, you should have done better. You shouldn't have made them feel that way. You hurt them, blah, blah, blah. So that's one coping mechanism. The opposite coping mechanism of that, both of which are suboptimal, is to lash out and make somebody else responsible. You did this. It's your fault. You made me feel this way. So regardless which one it is, it's very helpful, which is why we talked about that in previous episodes, to install a program where we have metacognition, we're aware of our thoughts, and we can ask ourselves, am I using my words as medicine or poison? Then another layer of that is looking at our partner and saying, what am I making their behavior mean about me? So if my partner, for instance, what's something I did this week? It was ridiculous. He, I don't know, didn't make me something when he made himself something. And I got really activated. And I started using my words a little bit spicy. I was being a little bit saucy, a little bit passive aggressive. And I caught myself, I noticed, and I traced it back to why. And then I observed his behavior and I thought, well, it's not, he doesn't consider me. He doesn't think about me. He doesn't care about me. I made it mean all kinds of absurd things. So I used one of my own trigger protocols and Socratic questioning. And I was like, is this true? And I was like, it is not true at all. So in that case, it was on me. Like I was making his behavior mean something that it in no way meant, if that makes sense. And over time, you can start asking people. We're very inauthentic, or I was going to say dishonest, but I don't know if that word might trigger people, but we're often making meaning of our partner's behavior and not clarifying if that meaning is true. So imagine that scenario if I walked up to my husband in the kitchen and said, when you didn't make me a smoothie, I made it mean that you don't care about me. I made it mean you don't consider me, and I made it mean you don't love me. Are any of those things true? He'd be like, no, not at all. But if I'm thinking those thoughts about him and I'm reacting as if those thoughts are true, despite I could find evidence. My husband is incredible. I could find 8,000 pieces of evidence every week that he loves me, considers me, protects me, cares for me, adores me, appreciates me, accepts me. So if I have some old subconscious program running where I'm making meaning of his behavior, that's evidence of a wound that I have that is nothing to do with him. So there's going into our partner's experience and trying to remember that they're flooded and overwhelmed. And there's also a piece of accountability in conscious conflict. And that accountability is, am I projecting one of my old wounds onto my partner, regardless of their behavior? And then how do I do the work to heal that wound or reprogram that belief? We talked in a different episode about an example of a previous relationship I had, where I had a partner who had a very unfulfilling childhood. And in that childhood programming, that software, the thoughts we think over and over become beliefs. Beliefs become perceptual filters, and the brain will always find evidence of what it believes. So I noticed in that relationship that no matter what I did to show him how much I thought of him, cared for him, considered him, he had a belief that nobody prioritized him or valued him or appreciated him. So his brain would ignore 200 pieces of evidence that I was like, I'm actually very good at showing my partner how much I appreciate them. It's something I'm really good at and I enjoy. I love filling my partner's bucket. But one slight misstep that his brain could turn that around and make it mean that I didn't care. And then he would behave as if I didn't care. And his brain would ignore. Now, was he consciously doing that? No, he wasn't consciously doing that. And I was able to spot those things and help find a loving, conscious way to correct them. But in most relationships, people would not be aware because the other person's behavior would trigger their own unconscious programs and the dance would begin. We have that compassion and empathy for the other person, but we also have the accountability for our own self and the words that we are choosing and the thoughts that we are thinking and the meaning we are giving things.
So what can men do when they might spot some of these things within their partner, but their partner, similar to like your example, like they might not even see that themselves?
Chances are they don't. So I have a concept that I call radical compassion. And this is a great time to use radical compassion rather than blame, because by the very nature of being unconscious, again, I know that's a word can be used in many connotations, but for metaphorical alignment, when somebody is in one of those programs, they are unconscious or in that hostile takeover from a part, they are unconscious. They are not aware, right? You can't be aware of something that is subconscious because it's below the level of your consciousness. So it's not who they truly are. That doesn't mean they're not accountable for their behavior. So then I lean into radical compassion, which is compassion for yourself that you were impacted. Compassion for yourself that something has hurt you so that you're acknowledging your own pain instead of bypassing it. What I used to do was I would jump right into compassion for the other person. Oh, that person sexually assaulted me. I feel so bad for them. He must have had a really hard childhood and nobody taught him better. And I would jump right to compassion for the other person and not have compassion for myself. Some people jump right to compassion for themselves and blame their parents or avoid accountability for how they've hurt others. So again, radical compassion is compassion for yourself that you were impacted. Compassion for the people that have impacted you with their unconscious behavior. And then compassion for those that you may have impacted with your unconscious patterns and behavior. So blame and judgment into more of an expanded state of compassion, that we're all healing. We all have stuff to work on. We've all been impacted living in the emotional dark ages. And compassion and love and conscious communication and doing our own self-work and healing in the container of relationships are the way forward for humanity.
I also have a question on when it comes to conflicts with really intense emotions. How can men navigate if their partner has really intense emotions, or vice versa, their partner navigate if they have them? Because I feel like it's kind of to your point, like we're not really taught how to give people space to actually go through their emotions, or as long as we're not threatened, or give them space to actually experience them. A lot of times I feel like the instant reaction is to try to shut them down or to get them to a place where they don't express those emotions, at least at that intensity level.
Yeah. So we try to manage others' emotions or manage our own emotions. And remember, as I often say, what Carl Jung said, what we resist persists. So if you actually want the emotion to stop and go away, the best way is to go into it, not to avoid it or try to fix it. Think of a child having a temper tantrum. They're like, but I want an ice cream for breakfast. They flip out, they cry, they stomp their feet up and down, they throw things, they cry, they hurl themselves around in a full body pout on the ground. And then 10 minutes later, they're like, all right, let's go play. Right? They're not like, oh God, I shouldn't be feeling angry. Oh no, I shouldn't say what I want and need. Okay, I have to suppress this. Or if a child is doing that already, they're going to have a lot of problems later on and probably fall into addiction or some other self-destructive behavior to cope with that pain. But typically, we let it out without taking it out on somebody else. So I have very big emotions. I think most people have big emotions. I think just a lot of people have been taught to squash them, and they're suppressing those emotional beach balls, which we have episodes about if you want to refer back to those. And when we have an emotion, we want somebody to what? So if you say, for instance, Alistair, we're feeling angry or sad, and I started trying to manage your emotion. Why are you angry? Okay, stop. Okay, don't be angry. Oh, no, don't be angry. Are you angry at me? And then I start making it about me. Did I make you mad? Is it my fault? Did it me? What would you really want? You would want somebody to sit with you and hold space for that emotion and say, I got you. Everything you feel is valid. Because the size of somebody's emotion, we need to be mindful of, I think, of using terminologies like you're too emotional or too sensitive, or why did you make a big deal out of nothing? I've had a lot of men say that to me in my life. Why did you make a big deal out of nothing? That's no big deal. And I remind people that what is no big deal to one person is a completely different deal to another person. I'll share a story because that helps us understand. I don't remember where I first read this story, so I don't know who to credit, but it's not my story. It's not my client. It's a story that I read once. And that is a woman one morning got up, her husband was at work. She got up in the morning, she went into the bathroom to brush her teeth, and her husband's wedding ring was sitting on the counter beside the sink. And she went into a meltdown. She was calling him at work. He had his phone off, but after work, he turned his phone on. There was like 35 missed calls. He got home. There was stuff thrown all around. His wife was sobbing, flipping out, like, where were you? Why didn't you answer me? And to the outside, it would look like, what's the big deal? You're reacting to nothing. But in that case, in childhood, her father had gotten up one morning for work, left his wedding ring beside the sink, and never come home. So it would not be a big deal to you or I if we saw our partner's wedding ring sitting on beside the sink, but to that person, so the level of their emotions is exactly and specifically proportionate to the size of the wound. So when we get that, we understand that the way somebody reacts tells us how big that want, need, boundary, value, wound, unsafety, trauma, whatever that is for them. So one step is never judging the size of somebody else's emotions or the size of our own emotions, and remembering that everything you feel is valid. And it's just a KPI or a portal or a gateway, like we talked in our emotional episode, to understanding how we can expand further, which over time helps us become stress resilient, trigger proof, and more able to stay conscious or piloting that vehicle of consciousness rather than in a parts to parts takeover. So it might feel uncomfortable at first, but over time, the rewards are definitely worth it.
And here, kind of to continue what you said about one's needs, boundaries, and values, how can those be integrated when it comes to conscious conflict?
Well, conscious conflict can sometimes be a catalyst for the ever unfolding understanding of our wants, needs, boundaries, and values. So if you are constantly prevented from doing a certain thing in your relationship, or you are self-sacrificing, or your partner is doing something that violates your boundary, sometimes you will get upset, angry. It will cause conflict. But if we use that conflict consciously in a conscious relationship and we use it with compassion, then it's an exciting opportunity to either heal a wound or cultivate more clarity on one or both of our wants, needs, boundaries, and values so that we can find those win-wins in our relationship rather than compromise, sacrifice, build resentment, or feel unfulfilled or like something is missing. So again, that conflict is sometimes that, okay, I'm about to expand, or I'm about to find more clarity, or, oh, something that I'm not aware of is about to pop into the level of my awareness, which means I'm expanding, becoming more aware, less unconscious, less reactive, and more in the driver's seat of that vehicle of consciousness rather than strapped in the trunk, responding to things that happened to us when we were 5 years old.
And how can men be more, or they can practice being more vulnerable when it comes to conscious conflict, especially with emotions being heightened or likelihood of being triggered also being heightened? Like, I feel like the natural response would be wanting to not like shut down, but not be vulnerable or not be sharing as much vulnerable stuff. So how can they navigate that?
Well, first of all, you want to assess if your partner is willing and open to engage in a more conscious conflict. And if you are in a remotely healthy relationship, they will be on board as long as you don't sell it as we need to fix you, but say, I want to get closer to you. Here are some strategies that I want to use so that we can learn to deepen our closeness because I love you so much. So again, it's going to depend how you say it. Rather, if you say, look, we need help or something, that's probably going to be less well received. So we want to think, how would I want to receive this information? And then for some men that have not historically expressed a lot of emotion in their relationship, I will be honest, sometimes it does not always go well for them. So in that case, they can work with someone else, someone like me, or a therapist, or a psychologist, or a men's group, or somewhere that they can feel safe to learn their emotions, practice that emotional vulnerability, practice that in a safe place before they go into grad school, which is because we don't, a man doesn't have it. There's no vulnerability. I can't reject or hurt one of my clients. So a lot of men will cry, express anger and vulnerability with me that they've never expressed to anybody in their life, including their partner. And my goal is always to help them learn and navigate that and then take that into their closest, most meaningful relationships. But I remind them, it's going to be easy with me, but that's where you get to do the real work. We're practicing here. We're in training school. And then when the rubber hits the road is in your deep, meaningful relationships, because those are the people that we perceive as having the power to hurt us more, because it just means more. So you could also read that book. You could suggest, I don't know many partners that would be completely opposed to, if a man came home and said to most partners, hey, I really want to do better and learn how to be more emotionally vulnerable with you. Let's read one of these relationship books together. I mean, that girl would be on the phone with everybody she knows the next day. You will never believe it. My husband's amazing. I love him. And probably you're going to have a fun night that night when it's time to go to bed. I mean, unless you're in a relationship that's already sort of in a red zone, in which case you might want to seek out a good qualified couples therapist.
And can you maybe talk a bit more on the importance of listening when it comes to conflict? Because I feel like naturally it might be the sense of like, I want to be heard, understood, but what's the importance in listening, and what would be good, maybe advice or some practical tools men can use when it comes to listening, when it comes to conscious conflict?
It's funny. I was working with a client yesterday on listening, actually. And he told me, I'm a good listener, but I just always know what other people are going to say. And I was like, what that means actually is that your mind is rushing ahead, skipping, skimming, jumping around what they're saying, and it's filling in the blank based on your experiential comparison and what you would feel in that situation. So that doesn't mean, it probably means you're a terrible listener. And he was like, whoa, people have told me that before. I'm like, well, there's probably something to it, and that's okay. We celebrated. We were like, yay, you're a terrible listener. That's amazing. Like, we celebrated it because we're like, great. That's like, that takes bravery. That's eating a shit sandwich. That takes bravery to look at. So if you notice yourself drifting off when people are talking, or you're having your own dialogue in your head of what you're going to say next, or you are finishing sentences in your mind, rushing ahead, attaching meaning, just notice that and say, well, nope. And keep practicing tuning into the other person. Holding space and listening is a skill that can be trained, but takes time because our brains are fast. We've never lived in a society that is sort of more vying for our attention. And a lot of us are very dopamine addicted, which makes listening a lot harder. And holding space and having your partner feel heard and you feeling heard requires listening skills, which I would just suggest that any human being just assume that they could do some work on that and really master that skill, because other people can sense if you're listening to them or not. And I remind really high achievers this a lot because I work with a lot of very high achievers. You know a lot, you're a genius, you have a lot to offer, you've been there, you've done it, you can mentor people. And there's a place for that, but people don't remember what you know. People remember you based on how you make them feel. And I'll get messages. I had a message this morning. Somebody messaged me and said, I really miss your presencing. So when I'm completely tuned into somebody, there is nothing. I'm not thinking about what I'm going to eat for dinner. I'm not thinking about what they think about me. I'm not thinking, does my face look stupid? Did they see the spider bite on my head? Well, now I'm thinking that because I'm saying it. But when I'm presencing somebody, I am not on my phone. I'm not finishing their sentences. I have mastered mostly. I always work on it, that ability to tune everything out and be completely focused on who and what I'm doing at that time. And listening, listening and asking clarifying questions. Like my partner will say, well, and then this, and I feel this, and I think this. And I notice that my brain is like, oh, he means this. Oh, he means that. And we fill in blanks. We kind of fill in the blanks. Brains do that. This is proven neuroscience. So I assume my brain is doing that. I ask clarifying questions. Do you mean this? Is this how that feels? Tell me more about that, because I make sure that I'm aware of how brains work. And like I always say, you train your brain is training you. So over time, you want to master your mind and train your brain and master the art of presence. This will help you make more money. This will help you be more liked at work. This will help you learn to tune into your own guidance system better. And this will make other people want to be around you and respect you and look up to you and admire you and feel safe with you. And I think that's a win-win for everybody.
A quick follow-up question here, because of the example you gave with your client. How can men know that they actually, or if they are a good listener?
Well, you could ask people. There, now here's another thing though, is that I had a friend once who everyone was like, he is the best listener. He's so good at listening. And I knew him very, very well. And I would be like, yeah, great. But then I told him once, I was like, you are not listening at all, are you? You're just completely having your own dialogue in your head. You're just really quiet. And he was like, I didn't have a clue what they said. He's like, I couldn't tell you anything that happened in that conversation. But because he's just quiet, he listens. But I mean, you could ask other people if they think you're a good listener. You could ask honest people, because of course we're a people-pleasing society. So everyone's like, oh, no, you're not. I said to somebody the other day, I was like, I said, oh God, I'm so bad at tech. I was trying to do a tech stack for something. I was like, oh, I'm so bad at tech. And 3 people are like, oh, no, you're not bad. You're not terrible at it. And I'm like, no, I'm really terrible at it. Like, I don't mind. So you have to be cautious that our inclinations be like, oh, no. We're a very disingenuine society because we're always trying to fit in and manage other people's emotions. And so if you have somebody really honest in your life, you could ask them. And you could just see if people tend to want to come to you frequently and tell you things. And just start again, noticing in yourself, are you finishing their sentences? Are you having other conversations in your head? Are you asking clarifying questions? Are you thinking about what's going to happen later? Are you wondering what they think about you? Are you thinking, I wonder if this shirt looks weird? Oh, wait. Oh, I'm going to sound really smart if I say something back, showing that I'm smart. A lot of people are very self-centered when they're listening, because we're just always thinking about ourselves, which again is not okay. It's not a bad thing. We should think about ourselves. Self-centeredness is actually the antidote to self-centeredness. I just wrote an article about that this week. Or being self-reflective and prioritizing ourselves is actually the antidote. But when we're in shame or trying to fit in, so in the unhelpful side of that, we're like, what does that person think of me? What can I say so that they think I'm smart? Blah, blah, blah. We're making it all about us, and we're not. People can feel that energetically, whether they're into woo-woo stuff like I am or not. On some level, we are all multi-dimensional species, and a part of us can feel that in somebody else, and then they will either be attracted to spend more time with us, or they won't really want to strategize, share, open, and be vulnerable with us. So if your family is not vulnerable with you, or they tell you you're a terrible listener, or they tend not to come to you with their deepest feelings and problems, it could be a possibility that you're a terrible listener currently who's going to become an awesome one.
And with this, also follow up with using words as medicine or poison. Again, like, how can men identify which one it actually is, in case if they might not be at that level of awareness where they can see that? Is there anything that they can look at or think about to know that how am I actually using my words?
That is something else that we train. And it's just constantly asking yourself over and over again, right now, is what I'm about to say true? Is it helpful? Is it kind? And if it's not, keep your side of the street clean. And even if somebody else is spewing poison at you, you don't have to swallow the poison. Somebody can be like, you're a selfish jerk and stupid, useless, whatever. That is their unconscious pattern. And you, unless you believe those things, you do not have to swallow that. And when you get really advanced at this, you'll find over time that even those things will not bother you. If somebody else is flipping out at me, it doesn't typically bother me anymore. I just think, oh my gosh, they're feeling really overwhelmed and flooded and they're out of control right now. And I'll say something like, thank you for sharing how you feel with me. Or that must be really overwhelming. Or I've felt angry before. It's valid. You know, I don't want to be forever judged on my most unconscious, obnoxious, victimy, deflecting, projecting. Like, have you ever said something to somebody that later you're like, oh, that wasn't like the nicest thing I could have said. So when somebody else is doing that, I recognize it as a cry for help now, most of the time. Unless I'm in my own unconscious dance or a hostile takeover from one of my parts. So yeah, just asking yourself over and over again, am I using words as medicine or poison? And that includes words to yourself, because if you're very hard on yourself and very critical on yourself and very judgmental of yourself and your own emotions, you're going to be hard on others, judgmental of others, typically, not all the time, but typically. You're more likely that you're going to be hard on others, judgmental of others, and you're going to project those qualities onto others. So one of the kindest things we can do for others is practice real self-compassion and radical compassion, and understand that we're all doing our best. We all act in obnoxious ways at some point, and we all have software running in our computers that we didn't install there. And again, I'm not saying accept abusive behavior, still have boundaries. It's just over time, living this way just means that almost nothing bothers you. You don't take things personally, and people really like you more. People, to me, it's just so natural now. I'll bump into somebody who'll be like, oh my gosh, Sandy, thank you. You changed my life. And I'll be like, oh, good. And I'll think, who the heck is this person? They'll be like, do you remember you came into the coffee shop and got a mint tea 4 years ago? You know, and I'll be like, no, I don't remember. But I just impact people differently. I make them feel seen and heard. And when I tune into somebody, I tune everything else out. And I am 100% present and there for them, not thinking of myself or others. Now, I do think of myself, not when I'm working with other people, but I fill my own bucket. I have a lot of self-care. And I treat myself like a queen, and my husband treats me like a queen. So I have a lot to pour out of my vessel. So it's not about only putting other people first. It's that I do the work. And when somebody does trigger me, which happens occasionally, I didn't get triggered actually I didn't even get triggered over the pandemic. I didn't get triggered I had a period where I didn't get triggered for years, even no matter what was happening around me. And that's a really fun way to live. I've had a lot of change in the last year. I've gotten married, moved to a new country, pushed a lot of my own boundaries and done a lot of expansion. So I find I'm now getting the odd trigger, but I feel grateful when I get triggered, because I'm like, oh, great. Now I know where I need to do the work. And if somebody else triggers me, they are giving me the gift of knowing where I have a weakness that I can strengthen, or where I have a wound that I can heal. So in the moment I get triggered and I think, well, how dare that person, blah, 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 blah. And then, 5 or 10 minutes later, it's usually pretty quick for me now. I'll be like, ooh, I got, this is a very unusual behavior for me. And it might be a little bit hormonal, because I'm going through that fun hormonal stage in life. But I was in an REI store, and one of the managers came over and told us that we weren't allowed to have our dog there, even though our dog came with us every weekend and everybody knew him by name and loved him. But I didn't know that the store had that policy. And I made it mean that she didn't like my dog. I made it mean all kinds of things. And I was like a little bit snotty to her. And I got all indignant, which is not like me. And again, I left and I was like, ooh, I used my words a little bit like poison. I made her behavior mean all kinds of things. I had my own shame collapse, which again is rare for me. And I phoned the store as soon as I got home, and I said, I'd like to speak to that manager. And I said, I just want to acknowledge that you did a fantastic job of upholding the policy of your company. I did not receive it well. And I just want you to know that I didn't say like, sorry, because when we say, oh, I'm sorry, we just want the other person to comfort us. I said, I acknowledge that my behavior might have impacted you, and that's not okay. You did nothing wrong. I felt ashamed and overwhelmed, and I took it out on you, and that's not okay. And she burst into tears, and she was like, I didn't even think of it. She's like, I didn't even think you were that bad compared to how most people are, whatever. And she's like, but that's like the most meaningful thing that's happened to me this month. And she said, just thank you. She said, I've never seen somebody do that in my life. And I'm like, well, I walk the walk.
And here, maybe as even like with the conflicts, when it comes to finding the solution, what could be some of the strategies or some advice you might give when it comes to finding the win-win?
Well, what I love about that book, Fight Right, is they talk about the different conflict styles. So, same as in last week, we talked about attachment styles that can help us understand our behavior and our partner's behavior. I wrote them down in case I forgot. But the different conflict styles are avoider, accommodator, competitor, compromiser, or collaborator. So if you read that book or you Google it, you can find a summary of those to help you understand your behavior and your partner's behavior. There are lots of protocols. We have a trigger protocol that we use for people. And we also have a little summary of today's show that I typed up that has some of these processes and procedures that if somebody wants to send a message to you or email, then you can send them that little protocol that I made up. They could read relationships books. They could read Fight Right. I do think it's a really wonderful book. I also have, what's the other book? Communication Miracles for Couples. I like that book. And just remember that, how do you want somebody to speak to you when you're overwhelmed, flooded, feeling frustrated, feeling sad, and just constantly saying like, is this what I would respond well to? And being willing to look at ourselves and say, I'm reacting because I have a wound there. So I'm accountable for my reactions. I can express my emotions without making somebody else responsible for them. I don't have to play emotional hot potato. A lot of us, if we weren't raised to be comfortable with emotions, when we get emotions, we're like, oh God, I feel sad, or I feel angry, or I feel guilty, or I feel jealous, or I feel resentful. And we're like, and we try to off them to somebody else and make them feel those things or make them responsible for those things instead of just letting that beach ball rise, go, feel it, and then you can heal it. Connect or connect and then correct. And then you can do the self-inquiry. And in our trigger protocol, we have things like, is this an old wound being picked at? Is this a boundary? And how to identify the difference between them? Is this a trauma? Is this biochemical? Like, have I not eaten in 5 hours and I ate French fries for dinner last night and had a beer at the game and then coffee this morning, and my gut may not be producing serotonin, so I might be in a shit mood and more likely to take it out on other people. So it's like, again, it's like running through our vehicle of consciousness and doing like a mechanic would do. It's like doing a checklist. Okay, the check engine light is on. Is it this system? Is this system? Is it this system? Is it this system? And that can help bring us into more clarity.
And can you talk a bit more also on the importance of forgiveness and letting go? Especially even like with some conflicts, letting go of the conflict and not dragging it then in another conflict, or using that as a tool to kind of, be better in the next conflict.
Oh yeah, the shame and ego. Bless our shame and ego. There's no shame and ego, but a lot of us are in shame and ego. We all have them. Shame and ego love to hold on to fights and be like, see, you are bad and I am good. I am right and you are wrong. Ha 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 ha. But that never brings us closer. And at the core of our shame, at the core of our fear, at the core of Our obnoxious behaviors are all wounds because we want love and belonging. So again, we can identify the behavior, we can maybe laugh at it a little bit, but it's never going to bring you what you actually want, which is presence, connection, acceptance, and that deep, intimate safety that we can create in a conscious relationship.
All right.
But it is a delicious ego payoff. And I notice I'm in the observer almost all the time. So I can observe all the little shenanigans of my parts. And sometimes I can see one of them being like, see, he's so bad. Let's punish him. Let's pout. Should we pout about that? And I'll be like, well, I don't think that's a super helpful strategy. And then I kind of go away and I do my own work. Or I'll have a part that'll be like, let's sulk. And then he'll know that we're really hurt. Or, like I can sort of observe all of the parts of me at the table of my consciousness. And most of the time I can stay in the CEO role or the loving, wise adult role. But occasionally I get a little hostile takeover. And that's when we're in one of those parts. A good KPI that we're in one of those parts is wanting to punish, wanting to hold on to. But it could be possible too that if that something in a conflict did hurt us, and then if it is coming up, you could also do some compassionate self-inquiry and say, actually, when you told me that you don't like it when I X, Y, or Z, that really hurt me. And we could be holding on to it because it's a wound. And then is that something that they said that triggered an old wound in us? Or is it something they said that just genuinely was unkind, or that we needed to clarify, or that we needed to hear? I think it's very important that we repair those wounds. We're going to cause wounds in each other in a deep, intimate relationship. We're either going to trigger old wounds or we're going to cause little micro paper cuts. And acknowledging that without just saying, I'm sorry, because I'm sorry means comfort me and tell me it's okay, right? It's not actually repairing the wound we caused in somebody else. Like imagine if somebody came to you and said, actually, I've sort of done this with you. You may not know. I'll bring up this example right now. With ADHD, I'm really terrible at certain things that are like schedules, remembering to do things. And I don't say to you, if I screw up a time that we're supposed to meet or something, I don't say, I'm so sorry, Alistair, I'm sorry, and make you say, it's okay, Sandy. I say, hey, I acknowledge that impacted you. Here's what I'm going to do better. And that must not feel very good. It's not because I don't respect you, but I understand that it impacted you. So you see how much more fulfilling that is and how that diffuses the ego more than I'm sorry. Because I'm sorry means tell me it's okay. It's not actually, I don't think, as accountable as saying, hey, when I've done this with my partner, I'll say things like, or like I did to that woman in that story today at the manager at REI. I didn't call and say, I'm so sorry. Because then what would she have done? She would have said, it's okay. I forgive you. What I said was, hey, you're great. Thank you for upholding a company standard. I know you did not make that rule, and I know it is your job to uphold it. And I did not behave the way I would have liked to behave. And I acknowledge that that might have impacted you, and I don't want to impact your day negatively. So I wanted to acknowledge that. You see how much more impactful that is? It's acknowledging we impacted somebody else instead of saying, but it's just because, but I know I didn't mean to, I didn't intend to. I didn't intend to hurt you. If I hurt you and I said, I know, but it's because I was having a bad day and I didn't intend to. Do you feel like I repaired that wound if I caused a wound in you?
Yeah, no.
No. But if I say, whoa, I became really passive aggressive because I was triggered. I took that out on you. You don't deserve it. I'm going to try to do better. And thank you for your patience with me. Does that feel more repaired?
Can you break it down? Because I feel like even with apologizing, that's something that's a really important distinction that you're touching on here, where you're not apologizing from a place of giving excuses, but you're kind of acknowledging the person. Or like, what are some of the things that men listening can keep in mind when it comes to apologizing or taking ownership or, something along those lines?
If you want to create deeper connection and actually repair all the micro wounds that most of us are definitely creating in our relationships, because we're living in the emotional dark ages, it's not about fault or blame. It's just, it happens. And first of all, think of yourself. Think if your wife, your partner, your husband, your girlfriend, your boyfriend said something or did something that really impacted you. You made dinner, you made a special night out, and you had planned it for days. You were wearing your handsomest outfit and you got flowers and wine or something. And your partner was like, oh, we're going to that restaurant again, or I don't have time for this today. Don't you know I had to whatever all day? And you get a little wound from that. What would it take for you to feel great? Would you rather your partner came to you and said, I'm so sorry, I didn't intend to hurt you, I just had a really bad day at work, and then, or would you rather your partner came to you and said, hey, you really were going above and beyond. Thank you for trying to create a special evening for me. I was not behaving in my highest alignment, and I regret speaking to you the way I spoke to you. You didn't deserve that. I was in a bad mood. I had a terrible day, and that is the reason, but it's never an excuse to hurt you. And I just wanted to tell you that I'm going to do better. It's be what we would like to receive. It's really quite simple. Give to others, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But it's hard when the ego and the pride gets all triggered, and the way we have programmed men and taught them not to be vulnerable, that pride gets in there too. And it's hard to eat a shit sandwich sometimes. But again, it's one of the most evolved, brave, evolutionary boss skills that you can learn is to own your shit without making it mean anything, and acknowledge when you've impacted others, because you're going to.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
never say it wasn't my intention to hurt you. That is confusing and less meaningful than saying, and if you don't know how it made them feel, don't assume you know. Just say, I regret the way I spoke to you. You didn't deserve that. How did that make you feel? You want her to be putty in your hands and feel safe with you? Ask her, here's what I did. How did that make you feel? I regret doing that. It wasn't your fault. And from now on, I'm not going to drink coffee all day and skip meals so that I come home hangry and bitchy. And that's what I'm going to do to solve it. You didn't deserve that.
What is getting in the way of even asking these questions? Because I feel like a lot of times these questions don't even get asked.
Pride, ego, lack of awareness, and the fact that we're in that unconscious programming where the parts are like, you're not a bad person. You only did that because of whatever. This is something I've noticed that I used to do that I think is hilarious / obnoxious. So if I would do something that hurt somebody else, I would be like, but I didn't mean to. If they really knew who I was inside, I didn't mean to hurt them. I'm a good person. I just, it's because this person pissed me off or that person pissed me off. And then this happened and justify and find all the, but if somebody else did something like that, I'd be like, how could you do that? You're bad. So we tend to, like, if somebody else does something obnoxious, we're like, bad. You're bad. And if we do it, we're like, well, but it's because, but. Or we implode and are like, you are bad. And we start the inner critic. And that's where you mentioned forgiveness. Forgiveness is great, but forgiveness doesn't look like, oh, I impacted you negatively because one of my parents was a narcissist and I was triggered. That's not accountable. So we can forgive ourselves. We can forgive ourselves and acknowledge the fact that we impacted somebody else. And that's why I like to program in that brain training of learning to eat a shit sandwich, because that's how you level up. So then it stops us from not wanting to have those conversations, because we're like, oh, I screwed up. That means I just went from this conscious to this conscious. That just means I did something when I was unaware, and now I'm in awareness. Don't beat yourself up for what you did when you were asleep, but be accountable for how that impacted other people and celebrate that you are now conscious. Celebrate that you're expanding. Celebrate your bravery. Celebrate your awareness. And acknowledge how it impacted other people. And practice forgiveness of yourself. The more you're able to forgive yourself, the more you're able to forgive other people.
Yeah, so
Sometimes that's not always true. Some people are very able to forgive themselves and not. I take that back. That's not true. That is not true. I call bullshit on myself. Sometimes people have no trouble forgiving themselves and are very stubborn at forgiving other people. So that's not true. But it probably is deep down, there's something they can't forgive in themselves. So yeah, more compassion, more lightheartedness, and learn to eat your shit sandwiches. There's like nothing more powerful, brave, admirable on this planet than just being able to own your shit and not beat yourself up, not live in guilt and shame, and just go, whoa, I was here. Now I'm here. I leveled up. Amazing. Now, is there anybody I need to acknowledge before I level on up into this next level of my expansive journey? And celebrate yourself. That's why when clients call me and they're like, oh, I had a client yesterday say, oh my gosh, what I'm experiencing in my relationship is exactly what I did to my last partner. And I was like, ding, ding, ding. And they were like, you said that to me a year ago, but it just hit home. Because sometimes these things take, all this pain I'm experiencing is exactly what I did to my former partner. And I was like, ding, ding, there you go. Don't beat yourself up. Congratulations. And we celebrated. I'm like, yeah, you were passive aggressive. You were mean. You were invalidating. You were doing all those things. And now you're experiencing it in return. But it's a lot easier to just acknowledge those things in ourselves and actively seek to heal our wounds and integrate our blind spots. Because otherwise, bless the universe or God or source or the ether or whatever metaphor you prefer, they're all valid. We'll make sure that you remember the work you have to do, but it'll be in like less fun ways. So one of the best ways that you can be a great human being is to learn to eat your shit sandwiches, and it will always be rewarded from the universe because you will be constantly leveling up. And you are amazing. So, yep, you're going to screw up. We all screw up. But it just depends whether you learn and grow from that and expand from that conflict or that reactivity or that self-awareness, own what we did. And like, what else could you expect from a human being? And be compassionate to your partner. And this takes time, I tell you, because some of the things that I have taught for years and that I coached a couple in their 70s who had been to 9 therapists and fired by 4 of them. And we had great success. In 3 months, they were like, great, connected. They didn't even think that was possible. It can be very effective. But I still have to practice these things. And I've been married for less than a year. And some things are coming up for me that I'm like, oh, I haven't seen this pattern in 10 years. Or, oh, a little part of me that comes out, does a little hostile takeover. I'm like, her? I thought we were done with her like when I was 23. And she's like, well, I'm back. I'm like, okay, well, we got some work to do. So, yeah.
So that's conscious conflict. And if you have any comments, questions, you can always comment down below if you're watching on YouTube or click a link in show notes. And there's always a link to click to book a call with Sandy as well, in case that you want to map out.
And how can they get our how can they get the conscious conflict protocol?
That will also be in show notes.
Great.
We will leave you will see the text conscious conflict workbook.
Great.
And anything you want to add?
No, I think that's great. Yeah, ask us any questions. And yeah, I think this stuff's really fun. So if you want to book a strategy session, I'd be happy to dig into this stuff with you. I'll tell you all the obnoxious things you're doing that you can integrate so that you be nicer to your partner. It'll be really fun. Men are like, what? Why would I want to pay somebody for that? Trust me, it'll be fun. It'll work.
All right, we'll see you next week.
Okay, bye for now.